Welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
It's Trevor and Ryan in the morning or night.
Yeah.
Or evening.
Trevor and Ryan in the morning.
Woo!
Not copyrighted.
Watching Chosen Season 2.
We're back.
We're back.
We took a break.
Took a break.
And on that break, all we did was film more videos.
Oh, man. We got some great videos coming
Yeah.
up. I'm excited. Had a couple special guests. Actually had one of them reach out to me the other night and ask, when's our podcast coming out? And I said, in September. And they were like, wow, okay.
Wow, you guys are on top of it.
So we are ahead.
That's a first.
I know. No, it just means we're getting ahead. We were behind when we started.
Yeah.
Excited now, pushing hard. And it was fun to take a break today and watch that during lunch. Goodness gracious. Episode 1, Season 2. I know you didn't have to do this. You had to wait a little while when I watched the original because, you know, there's a gap between Season 1 and Season 2. And Season 1 did so well that they were like, you know, now I think they have like 7 seasons planned.
7?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So I think they're doing like early church stuff. So we'll see. Like Acts. Anyway, I'm super excited.
That'd be so cool.
So, yeah, I mean, if you haven't been on this journey with us, you may not know this, but we have already finished Season 1 of The Chosen, and this is now Season 2. You can go back and look at those, react with us, watch with us if you want, in the sense of kind of trying to pick some cool little nuggets that are out in some of these, as well as just reacting to the quality and some of the things they choose to do.
Yeah. That was a lot of my initial reaction, just kind of alluding back to those early episodes, was it doesn't feel like a terribly done show. It doesn't feel like a show that was done, funded by some Christian billionaire somewhere.
Yeah.
It feels like a BBC show, and I love those.
I think it has been true to itself. It has kept its kind of, I would call it feel, or its kind of identity on what it's trying to do. Maybe, should we say vision? Yeah. Almost. Kind of has some clear vision of what it's going for. I think
it's been really true to its value number 1.
It's been very true. And if you don't know what we're talking about, go look at our values and our vision.
The episode right before this.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So I want to start out by just saying this episode, I think, I'm trying to think of any others, might be the most chock full of any episode we watched, of kind of, I feel like, almost giving you these like nuggets of like what they're saying and what's going on and reading into things. And it's not straight clear. It's much more of like, you could watch this and have no idea about some biblical stuff that's going on in the background and really enjoy it. But if you do, it feels like a really neat, deeper episode. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. There's even the first few minutes. So I was trying to really hard to figure it out because I went to Bible college. Trevor went to Bible college. So we feel like we have a hand up. I even, taking a step back, I even talked to my wife about watching this show, and she's like, I don't want to watch it. I already know what happens.
Yeah.
I was like, that's what I thought too. We both took a gospel or two as a full semester class. We both went through a ton of Book of the Bible classes, a lot of New Testament. We both know the story of the New Testament pretty well. And yet, I feel like I'm still on the edge of my seat, even as somebody who knows all this stuff, watching a show about it. And so at the very beginning, you could see that all the apostles were giving their testimony about something.
Yep.
About Jesus, but to someone, and you couldn't really tell who because his back was to the camera, and so I could feel myself on the edge of the seat, like, who is it? And one of my favorite parts of the episode, one of the funniest parts, is Matthew being interviewed, and he's like, it was exactly this day and this hour and this whatever, and he's like, we don't have to be that specific, and he's just like, mine's going to be that specific, and just undermines everything. Oh my gosh.
Well,
so funny.
There's so many lines. I would say the first 5 minutes, I said it could have been like an intro to a Gospels class, like could have been a secret quiz to pick up on, like, all right, so you're interviewing Peter, who we think has his own gospel through Mark's recording. Then you're getting Matthew telling you like he's gonna have a more detailed account. Then you get it's John writing this stuff down. Yeah, and he's like, I don't know if it'll be a whole book, but we at least need to get some eyewitness testimony written down. And you're like, it's gonna be a whole book. You know, like, it's gonna get there. And then it ends up being he's interviewing Mary, which he calls mother, or
Yeah, which
like
is
3
a
or
cool
4
nod.
times.
It's a cool nod to the scripture in John
Mm-hmm.
where Jesus hands his own mother off to be taken care by John.
And then they're alluding to the death of James, Big James.
James, the brother of John.
Yep, being killed.
Yeah.
And he was, in fact, one of the first apostles to be martyred. And it's one of those, like, not the brother of Jesus, but the brother of John.
And not the other disciple.
Yes, and not little James.
Yeah.
So that's what they call him. And, I just think there was a ton of really fun stuff. And he ends up, that tension in the first scene is like how he's going to start his own gospel, or how he's going to start his own version of these events. And it is neat because the start of John is one of the most unique of the 4 gospels.
Yeah.
It's definitely like the one that you're like, this seems very thought through, like very intentional. Mary alludes to it. She's like, where are you going to start at it? Like, you're going to start at the, the birth of Jesus? And he's like, nah. And he's like, are you going to start at like the genealogy? And he's like, nah, Matthew's got that covered. And you're like, yeah, he's going to.
Here's the only thing about this.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way that they constructed that whole scene at the beginning and the way they wove that through the episode, even into what scripture is Jesus going to pick to read in the synagogue at the very end, and he lets John pick, and he says, I kind of like the beginning and whatever, and that weaves into how John begins his gospel. I thought that was all really beautiful. The only weird thing to me is that I feel like, from what I've learned, and this isn't definite fact, but it is our best guess in Christian academia or whatever, is that John was the last one to write a gospel. So that's the only confusing thing for me, is like, Matthew, when I write mine, I'm like, did you not already write yours? When John's writing his, on top of that, John probably wrote last, and he also seems, he's not one of the 3 synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who seem to have taken notes from each other.
Yep.
His seems different. It's the same testimony of the same person, but like everybody else got to talk about all the answers first, and he didn't, which is why this scene with John talking to all the different disciples is kind of weird to me. If it's supposed to be last, and if it's supposed to be the one that didn't have communication, it seems like all that is not what they're doing here. But
to me, it made sense, and this is how I clarified it in my mind. And maybe it'll help you. Maybe you'll be able to. But in my mind, after studying John, it seemed like he had limited interactions, but not the full story of a lot of some of the other details of those. And it seemed to him that he wrote his, just like the intro of his gospel, in a much more intentional way. And obviously, like the 7 names of Jesus, the 7 signs, like the much more intentional way. And then even him, it seems like he's not recording it for his own gospel. He's just like, we need to write these down. Like, they just need to be recorded.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I mean? And he's like, I don't know if it's going to be a book or not.
Yeah.
But it's just, that's what I feel like we need to do.
Because you see him in the show, even before this episode, writing stuff down at different points. But he's not writing in the Gospel of John. He's just writing down snippets and notes and stuff, and maybe it was assembled later. That totally makes sense. And I agree with you. The way that he puts it together is like an artist more than like a historian.
Yes.
A historian's trying to preserve exactly what happened.
And that's Luke's version, I would say.
Who Jesus actually was by telling true things in a way that's set up to frame who Jesus actually is.
Yes, and that the intro to his gospel reveals that so quickly, because the way he frames that up, it's a declaration of theology, it's a declaration of God's identity, his triuneness. Like, there's such a beautiful picture in the first 3 to 5 verses of the Gospel of John. And I really enjoyed that. There's a lot. There's so much in this episode to talk about, because in my mind, this episode does the impossible, right?
Yeah.
It goes to the end of the story, takes you to the very beginning of creation, and then in between puts you in this place of almost like restoration between the Samaritans and these Jews. And it puts you at this birthplace of Jesus exposing what his kingdom is going to be all about. And it's going to be a kingdom of humility and a kingdom of kindness.
Am I correct in that most of the stuff in this episode is not from the gospel account? So it's crazy because I think all that's actually in the text after John 4 is that they stayed there a few days. But you normally think what they did when they stayed there a few days. Did they hide away? Did they whatever? And this episode seems to assert that they did the same ministry they were doing everywhere else.
You know what it felt like to me?
Yeah.
It felt like at the very beginning, Mary's telling John, like, there's no way you could record all these things. If you used every book, every page, they wouldn't be able to contain it. And John's like, I'm using that. That's it. And then it felt like it felt like a movie scene where it's like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Where it's like
replaying.
Here's the unrecorded thing that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
That hasn't been, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, this is the thing that I don't even know if I want to write about because it's Samaria.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know if I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know?
Yeah.
Because we have the scene in the middle, which to me was one of my favorite scenes where Jesus actually gets angry with a couple of his apostles, or a couple of his disciples. They have this scene where, like, he almost is a little bit more forceful than we've seen him be with his disciples. And it's a very direct scene, which gives omen to when, you know, Jesus is going to have to interact with Peter at some point and be a little bit more direct if they choose to record those. But James and John have kind of been not tricked, but have been taught a lesson kind of unintentionally, not realizing how they've been taught. They've worked really hard. They thought they've been treated special. Come to find out, Jesus did the whole thing to kind of teach them this really powerful lesson about whether or not they think they're better than other people. Yeah. But in the middle, we have this, I think it's recorded in Luke, but I could be recorded in Matthew. I don't remember. It's one of those two detailed ones, I'm pretty sure. But they get basically spit on and thrown rotten food and rocks on them by these Samaritans that are passing through, basically being racist. And Jesus is like holding James and John back, and then they literally turn and they're like, you said we'd get special powers. Let us call down fire on them and burn them up. And the response, did that scene stick with?
Yeah. I think you had told me about this before we ever watched this episode, like months and months ago. But yeah, Jesus' response was like, you are so far off base.
He actually is sarcastic with them.
Yeah.
Because he first rebukes him, right?
Yeah.
He's like, no, this is exactly why I had you do this.
Yeah.
This is not what my kingdom's about. And then he has like a sarcastic moment at the end of, like, after he's explained it, after he's been a little more harsh, where he like looks at him and he goes, you wanted to call down fire.
Yeah.
like he's just almost like, oh, boys.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Seriously, though.
It made me laugh really, really hard. I thought they've done a good job now, 2 or 3 episodes where Mary obviously makes the mistake and goes back to her old life, and then she has to be restored. Do you remember that? I think it was episode 7 where she comes back and she's like, I made another mistake. I didn't want to have to be redeemed.
That hasn't happened yet.
Oh, has it?
No.
Okay, so Mary originally has a moment, and her struggle is going to continue to be much like Peter.
Yeah.
Where he goes to his wife and he's like, he picked the wrong person. Okay.
Yeah.
There's multiple times in this. Matthew, same thing. His story continues because he meets Thomas in this episode, and that interaction at the door is probably my favorite interaction between the two in this episode that has nothing to do with Jesus. It felt like two really smart people contracting. So play with this for a second. Thomas answers the door. They have already shown the tension with who's the woman? I forget the woman's.
Oh my gosh, I cannot remember.
Marara? I can't remember.
It's something like that, and I'm gonna look it up while we keep.
While we talk, so her dad is upset that he's going into Samaria to try to meet this random Jesus who did the wine, but Thomas comes to the door. Matthew goes, "Hi," and Thomas goes, "I don't know you." Like, that's his first, and he's like, "Cool. What are you looking for?" And he's like, "Jesus, he's not here." And he slams the door in his face. And then Thomas says, Matthew, Matthew is being rude. And then Matthew goes back and he goes, "You knocked on a random door and you said, I don't know you. Is that not rude?" Like, they have this like perfect interaction.
They're
and
already at each other's
tension
throats.
is this. So I guess what I'm trying to point out is like there is just this continual thing of like grace and truth that's like floating through each of these. And there seems to be this moment in the end of this episode where, you know, basically Jesus has been invited.
Her name is Ramah.
Ramah, thank you. Jesus has been invited into the synagogue to read the from the scroll of Moses.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there, and they only have the first 5. And he's sitting there being asked to pick something, and he calls John in. And that's just one of my favorite moments because it feels like after you've been scolded by your coach or your teacher or somebody of authority above you, your boss, and now they've called you into this special place, and they're like, hey, what's your favorite? And his response is like you and me, right? We're like, I don't feel very worthy to pick anything
that would make me. Yeah.
Why would you want me to pick? And there's this part of me that wonders if all the disciples didn't feel that way. I mean, in the middle of this story, we have that Samaritans that's feeling the same way. It's like Jesus is showing John in that moment that it's like, it's not about that. Like you're disqualifying yourself.
Yeah.
I haven't disqualified you in any way. That judgment you were putting on other people, you've now just placed on yourself. And I haven't done any of that. And I think the ending of this episode was one of the most powerful, I guess maybe as a Bible nerd.
Yeah.
Because watching something like John 1:1 get made.
I was heard in Bible college that John 1:1.
Yeah.
It's John 1, the beginning, and Genesis 1 matched in certain ways. And I read them, and I knew that they matched on paper. And I'd had moments like that before where I'm like, man, they're so beautiful in how they match. But watching John pick that part of Scripture, not really think about it way too much, and Jesus read it, and then it juxtaposed back to the beginning with John writing the beginning of his gospel account. And just that bounce back and forth with just like watching his face.
And it was such a neat script moment because, obviously John, they could have just had it just kind of an oversight, right? Where he's like, I like the beginning. And Jesus is like, me too. I like it all. Let's read this. But John has that little line in there where he's like, the Greeks, they use a word for beginning or, wind or spirit. It's called this. And he's like, it means construct or mind and all things that were created. And what does Jesus say? Did you remember what Jesus says? It's this really cool little line. I pointed it out when we were watching, but he says, that's one of my favorites. And it's one of my favorite memories.
Yeah.
And like I was like, John was like, yeah. Like all of a sudden was
like maybe he meant memory, like I loved reading that when I was a kid. But no. Jesus means
I remember
being there and creating everything.
Yes. And so when you hear John, they're transported to kind of that, whatever year mark is when he's writing that, and you're hearing him go, all things that have been created were created in him and through him. He's thinking about that. It's like Jesus wasn't just saying like, oh, I liked reading this. He's like, no, I remember when I was there when it started. Like it's a memory. Yeah. And to me, that was just a powerful scene. That really, I think, is kind of, like I said, I think moving us into how this season is going to be a little different because they have this ability to kind of start to open the flower of like taking us into the future a little bit, maybe bringing us back. But also, I think starting to see how these disciples are going, we need to write this stuff down. Yeah. Like, we need to record this stuff.
I love that a little bit at the end of season 1, but I like how it's developing now. The other thing I liked, two other things I liked. One, going back to James and John being rebuked by Jesus a little bit.
Yeah.
I feel like that's going to be a trend. Because, again, I've only seen as far as we're shooting these. I'll watch the episode. We'll shoot the next one. Even though Trevor's seen all of season 2.
Even though I can't even remember. Like, we started this episode, I was like, I don't remember what happens.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. But I feel like the shock of everybody, of Peter and of John and different people when they got called at the beginning was so big that their like personalities changed, and that stayed for a while. And you've seen them question Jesus and be like, you want to go through Samaria and whatever, all these things. But I feel like now they're settling back into a little bit their personalities. They're still enthralled with Jesus, but they're settling back into their own faults that they're very aware of.
Yeah.
But just like, yeah.
And that scene, like we were talking about a little earlier at the end when they're picking the books, John says that. He's like, I'm just a man. And what does Jesus say? He's like, I'm just a man too. Like, I'm a man too, John. And he like turns and looks at him, and you can tell John's like, and he's like, but I am who I am.
Yeah.
And then he's like, because they're looking at the books of Moses while he's saying that, and of course that's
while he's saying God's catchphrase.
Yes, while he's saying the like secret like wink, 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 wink. Who do I tell Pharaoh? You
Yeah.
tell him I am sent you.
Yeah.
Good name. That's it. Yep, that's it. No, I do think there's some power too in watching Jesus fix that wagon. He like
Yeah.
gets underneath it, and the guy's like, "You're really good at this." And
You
he's
should
just
set up a
you should
shop.
set up
He's
a-
like,
He's like, "Dude, it'd be nice. It'd
Yeah.
be nice to just run a shop."
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
This season is going to be a fun ride, but I was just blown away with how different it felt from season 1.
Yeah. If I don't even know how it felt different, like what words to put with it, but I noticed it felt different in that, like, it just felt final. Like they're already going. All of season 1 felt like something starting. It's almost starting. And the very end was that like 80s like freeze frame high five moment of like, we did it. We're starting. And so season 2 starts and it's like, okay, we're in the middle of it.
Yep.
I feel like we can't end this episode without talking about tilling the field, whose field it was, going to his house for dinner, that whole
That scene was probably secretly the one that I remembered the most when we got into the episode. And when I saw him tilling the field, I was like, oh man, that. So here's my question to you. This guy, James and John, they think they're just towing a field for like passers through or other Jews that are like going through Samaria. It's like, this is going to be a secret way for them to not have to interact with the Samaritans. They're going to have this random field out here. And they're like, oh, we're such good people.
Yeah.
And then they find out they actually plowed it for some random Samaritan guy that's really poor.
And that was Jesus' intention.
And that was Jesus' intention the whole time. And they, like I said, it wasn't tricked, but it was like a lesson for them to learn.
Yeah.
And then you find out as they're sitting around the fire, which I love the idea that Jesus is like, that's what I want. I want to have a meal with you.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, and you don't even have to provide the meal. I'll bring the meal. I just want to be with you. And that thought process alone, I could preach probably 10 sermons on that type of ideology and what that brings to what Jesus wants versus what we think we need. But the idea, too, then they sit down and this guy starts to confess who he really is because he feels guilty that Jesus thinks he's someone he's not. So he tells the story about being poor and being hungry and robbing a random person that's along the road who's a Jew, and they leave him naked along the road.
I know. It felt like the opposite to the Good Samaritan. I know that's what we're leading to. It felt like the opposite to the Good Samaritan. And I was just waiting for Jesus to say more about that story. He says this whole story to Jesus, and he's like, you wouldn't have done all this stuff if you knew who I was. And Jesus said, I do know who you are. And he said, that guy is alive today. And I was waiting for more. I was waiting for like, and it's little James. He was on the way to join the temple singers, and you almost killed him, and that's where I found him.
Yep.
I was like, great. Okay, that's his backstory. That didn't happen.
But see,
And I was waiting for him to talk about how he was the one who beat up the guy in the Good Samaritan story.
Yep.
And then a priest and a Levite walked by, and they didn't do anything, and then a Samaritan, just another Samaritan.
Just another Samaritan, right?
But neither of those happened. He just said he knew the guy's alive, and I was like, okay.
See, but that's why I feel like this show succeeds.
Yeah.
Because it didn't need to go there in order for it to be powerful. For me and for you, it sounds like I went,
Yeah.
could that be? Maybe that
Yeah.
was? You know?
This
like,
is not something from the gospel account, but it is super plausible
yeah.
that it's something that could have happened because, like you said, John didn't record everything that happened, and it says that they were there for a couple days. And what I know about Jesus' ministry is it looked a lot like what he was doing the other times he was doing ministry.
It just wasn't recorded the whole time.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about it.
Both that, and I've also heard Bible college professors say, like when he teaches on the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, that's probably a collection of a lot of his stories and teachings that he taught all the time in different places. So who's to say he didn't teach in Samaria that way? Who's to say he didn't do miracles in Samaria? Well, that one miracle with that one guy.
Yeah, well,
Samaria
and that,
one
you know,
way.
this Sermon on the Mount, I've always heard it as this is a sermon he probably preached multiple times.
Yeah.
This is a sermon he just had ready, and he was just kind of like,
Yeah.
you want a sermon? I'll give you this one. This one is the, you know, whatever. And the thing about why I think this episode is really fun is because I feel like this was a risky episode.
Yeah.
Because there was no evidence that they went and stayed at the woman at the well's house. You know, they had that great little scene where the guy's like, I'm normally a grump, but the city's so good, I'm just trying to be more cheerful to fit in, you know, and then he's like, you know, you can stay in this room, but it's haunted, and Jesus is like, I'll take that one. Like, just little cute little fun things in there.
Yeah.
But what made the episode work for me, what made it really work, was how well they set it up in the very opening, and then how well they closed it.
Yeah.
What has been created, everything that's breathed, came from him. And it's like, he's a part of all this stuff that's recorded and unrecorded. He knows, he sees. And the character of Jesus stayed true through the whole episode. The interaction with Ramos, I think it's Roma, dad was super Rama, super painful. You know, the dad basically said, I can't give you my belief. I can't give you my devotion. Please take care of my daughter. I mean, that was basically his statement. And Jesus is sitting there like, what I ask of my followers is a lot, but those that don't believe, I ask very little. And, you know, painful things to hear. And you can tell Jesus is sitting with that tension, trying not to make it go away, but hating that it's there, not wanting it to be there. Just a really healthy episode overall. Very, very exciting. I think that the ending made me hopeful that, you know, what other things are we going to get to kind of focus in on? What other things are we going to get to expand on? You know, what other things are we going to get to kind of see from behind the scenes or get a chance to think about? Really just something that kind of whet my appetite to get back into and seeing the rest of the season. I'm excited about it.
I'm stoked.
So, hey, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope this was fun. Again, I hope you take the time to go on the journey. If you haven't started or this, you just jumped into season 1, worth it to go back and watch, you know, all the episodes that we've recorded. Don't just jump into season 2 if this is the only thing you've watched. You know, go back and watch. It's definitely a show, too, that you could sit open with your Bible and just go like, what are they talking about? Or Google and just try to find it. So lots of episodes coming out. Holy cow. Tons of content. Excited for it. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss out on anything. We have a Vision and Values series coming out on the other channel, or on Thursdays, I should say, on this channel, on our other release day that I think would be, if you do nothing else over the next month, make sure you're checking in and watching those. So we'd love that.
They're the top playlist on.
So if you go to our YouTube channel and boom, and if you're watching on Spotify and
Apple Music,
they're on there as well. So, hey, I hope this episode was as encouraging and fun to watch as it was for Ryan and I. I know
loved it.
Both enjoyed it tremendously, and I'm excited to continue to watch. So, hey, have a great and glorious day in the Lord. Until next time, see you later.
See ya.